Hey Spookaroos, we are so close to the Halloween season here in 2020. I can just feel it in my bones and I'm getting excited for it. I hope you are too. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different this year. I'm still going to be out there in Salem. I don't know what it's going to be like, aside from everyone's going to be wearing masks, of course, and trying to stay away from each other. But other than that, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year. We'll see what happens, but we are going to do our best to make the most of it. That is for sure. This is another remix episode. This is about Jack the Ripper. And really, this is one that we could do a huge multi-part series about. Jack the Ripper was one of the first true crime cases that I ever got like super into. Even as a little kid, I was that weird little kid walking around with books about Jack the Ripper. I'm sure a lot of you guys were too. And trying to figure out who my suspects were and all that kind of stuff. I do enjoy watching documentaries and TV shows about Jack the Ripper, but it's kind of like Bigfoot. Like these people just like are out and they're like on the hunt and they're trying to figure something out, and then they're like, "Oh, we're gonna find out this. This is gonna be the episode where we reveal the real name of Jack the Ripper," and it's always some bullshit. So that does get a little bit old, and that's a little frustrating in that end. And but anyway, with that said, here's our unique and original take featuring Jennie Blades, who I miss a whole lot. I do still talk to her, of course, but she hasn't done the show in a long time. So hopefully she'll come back. But anyway, here's me and my hobgoblin talking about Jack the Ripper. Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and tonight, my returning guest host this week, my friend, Jennifer Lassess.
Hello.
But to me, she'll always be Jennie Blades.
Hobgoblin.
That's right. So welcome back. This is your second tour of duty here.
I know. Thanks for having me for the second time.
Well, you are on the number one most downloaded episode.
Why, thank you.
Which would be episode number 3, Ghost of Johnstone's Inn.
That's
Very
right.
popular.
That was a good one.
With the folks out there. Tonight we're going to talk about Jack the Ripper.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do, there's a couple things I want to talk about first. First of all, I want to tell you about a dream I had. How I woke up this morning, as a matter of fact.
Oh, boy.
Because I have been up since 1:30 this morning. Why, you may ask? Well, I was researching for tonight's show and watching some documentaries online about Jack the Ripper.
Were you scared?
No, but what happened was... I fell asleep with the computer running with these documentaries, and it was on YouTube, and I had autoplay on. So instead of just stopping at the end of the Jack the Ripper show, it kept playing like these true crime documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a dream at some point in the night where I was in the living room of the house that I grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
and I was watching TV, and it was late at night, and I was sitting in the couch in my living room, which was like right under the window that looks out onto the street.
Yep.
And I lived sort of like on a little hill. And now this was a fear that I had in childhood, and it never actually happened, but I was always afraid to look out the windows at night.
Oh, my gosh. That is like one of my biggest fears ever.
Because I was always afraid I'd see somebody
looking back at you.
Yeah. Or just something like even just someone walking on the street that shouldn't be there. Like I lived in a little cul-de-sac in a quiet town.
Mm-hmm.
Like there shouldn't be people outside like at night just walking around.
Everyone go to home, go to bed.
Yeah. So in the dream, I turn and I can hear like the TV is saying like he crept up to his victim's window and blah, 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 blah. And that was my real life computer.
Yeah.
Like I was
playing
hearing
in
it.
your head.
Yeah. And, but in the dream, I turned to look out the window when it said that.
Don't do
and
it.
I saw a shadowy figure running up the hill. And I was like, and I wasn't scared. I mean, I was scared, but I started to try to yell in the dream. Not because I was scared, but to try to make noise to scare this prowler off.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't. Like, it was like, And then eventually I finally got out a big scream. But guess what?
Were you screaming in real life?
Yes, I was.
That's awesome.
And that's what woke me up.
And your neighbors hate you.
Well, that's what I like. As soon as I woke up, I realized what was happening, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And I wasn't afraid or anything when I woke up, but except that I was afraid that the neighbors were going to call the police and be like, "I don't know, he's screaming up there. It's 1:30 in the morning."
Something's happening.
So I was like, "Sorry." I didn't yell it, but I just said it loud enough that if anyone was listening through the walls, they would just hear.
You didn't go back to bed though?
I tried, but then I was just up. Like it wasn't because I was afraid. I was just.
Yeah, right.
Oh, and you know what was on? It was a show about the original Night Stalker.
Oh.
The East Area Rapist.
Ah.
Yeah. So they were talking about him coming to people's windows and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So I switched it. I started watching Family Guy, I think.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Put on
And
something
Patton
happy.
Oswalt's new stand-up special. Yeah. But still, couldn't fall back to sleep. I was just awake at that point.
Windows at night. That's a terrifying thing.
Yeah.
I hate that. I always expect someone to be looking right back at me.
Yeah, especially because there was like a street light that I could see from and I was just afraid like I was going to see someone come around the corner and be under the street light. No.
Totally non-Jack the Ripper related.
No.
But when I was a kid, we were up in a cabin in New Hampshire somewhere. So we were like in the woods. Maybe we were in Maine. I don't know. We were somewhere in the woods. And my friend and I were sharing a room together. And it was this dark and stormy night. Total dark and stormy night type of thing.
Yeah.
And I went over to the window to go and shut the window, but I was still kind of scared. And it was like out of a horror film. It was a bolt of lightning, and there was a guy standing at like the edge of the woods in like a Gordon's fisherman type yellow hat, you know, like the yellow plastic coat.
I know what you did last summer.
Freaked me out. I jumped into the bed screaming. My friend was like, "What's going on?" My parents were like, "What was going on?" The next morning, my parents were like, "Open up the closet door to the basement." I opened it up, and the Gordon's fisherman outfit was hanging on a hook over there. So I thought someone was standing outside, did it to me on purpose, but I never forgot that.
So wait, what was it though?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to think about it anymore. That was it. Told the story.
Right. I thought you were going to say like, oh, it was my dad. Like, you know,
well, that's
blah,
kind
blah,
of what
blah,
I was wondering. Yeah, I was kind of like, it's probably my stepdad that totally
Yeah.
was out there and stuff. But they were like, no, it wasn't us. I'm like, yeah, well, even
Okay.
still, it scared the heck out of me. So,
All right. Anyway, you want to talk about Jack the Ripper?
sure.
Well, first of all, I like to make the audience wait.
Okay.
They're learning a hard lesson. I think the last
The
episode, it was like almost 20
suspense.
minutes before we actually got to the subject.
Ooh.
We won't be that bad.
Okay.
But I want to talk about why I asked you specifically
Yeah, why did you ask
to
me
come and talk
specifically?
about Jack the Ripper. Because last time you were here, you had specific knowledge, being a town historian,
Oh, thank you. Flatter me.
of the town where the story was set.
Mm-hmm.
But this one is about London.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you lived in England, but you didn't.
I didn't live in
you didn't
anywhere
live in
near London.
Yeah.
No.
But really, the reason I asked, as you know, is because you and I have been to London together twice.
Twice. Yeah.
And both times we took the Jack the Ripper tour.
This is true.
And one was a super awesome one,
Yes.
and the other one was not as much.
And we definitely agree on that.
Yeah. So it was a long time ago, longer than either of us would care to admit.
Yeah.
I had my first beer in London.
Oh, as did I.
Yeah.
What'd you get?
Have? Mine, I forget. It was like Wolfschlager or something like that.
You're in England and you get a German beer. Really?
I just ordered the cheapest thing.
I think I had a Guinness.
You're right.
I
Yeah.
got a Guinness.
Well, it was the Russian bartender. That was
And
the other
the
thing.
bartender's name was Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. They really tried to make us drink a lot in England. Like I went to a bar one time to get a Diet Coke. I think we were in a restaurant somewhere.
Yeah.
And I just went up to get a Diet Coke. And he was like, "You don't want that. You want a beer."
Well, you always looked older anyway.
I guess. But I was like, "No, I just want a Diet Coke."
And I remember we went to the club. We went to a club,
Yeah, we did.
Leicester Square, maybe.
Yeah. And that was funny because there were British people in the same hotel that we were in, but they were from like the middle of the country or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they were nursing students. I remember that.
Yes, because one of them I was talking to was going to be an EMT, and I was like, "You're like 16 years old. What?"
Yeah. But they were nursing students and they were staying in the same hotel as we were, so we would hang out with them in the lobby. And then we decided we were going to go to a club.
Mm-hmm.
And the first trip, the chaperones did not give a shit.
Which
And there was only
awesome.
like
there
10
was
of
only
us.
a few of us. Yeah, it was a very small group, and I think we were very well behaved.
We were, but we had the run of it. Like we could do whatever the fuck we wanted.
Yeah.
So we decided we were going to go like clubbing.
Sorry, Mom.
In London. Yeah. But we were well behaved.
No,
though.
we were. We did very well.
And I remember what's funny is I have zero memory of the actual like going to a club. Like I don't remember that at all.
We weren't there for that long.
No, I do remember meeting the British kids in the lobby and saying like, "Do we look all right? Like, are we going to get in?"
Oh yeah, they were like
Like
yeah,
this,
you have to wear
and they're
this
like,
and that.
Yeah, they were giving us fashion
Too
tips.
much work. Way too much work.
But then I remember one of them was like, "Yeah, and when you get there, make sure you use your American accent." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Because I was going to get up there and be like, "Good day, governor.
Top of the morning.
Let me into your fine establishment."
That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And London, don't complain about your tube because it's way better than Boston's
Yeah.
T system.
Yeah.
It's so easy. Like it was so easy to get around London. That's what I remember.
I loved jumping on the double-decker buses. Oh, and I do remember the Wax Museum. That was a ton of fun.
Yeah, Madame
Both of them.
Tussauds and the Rock Circus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Rock Circus had Duran Duran.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
No, you're all about Duran Duran.
Yeah.
We're definitely throwbacks to Jennie Blades. We were born in the wrong times.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I was all about The Who in high school, and you were all about Duran Duran.
Duran Duran, Bon Jovi, 80s.
Let's talk about the infamous Jack the Ripper. Probably the most famous unsolved murder mystery in the history of the world. He was not technically the first serial killer.
Yeah, I don't think so, no.
But he's kind of like the first one of pretty much the common era. Depending on which expert you ask, you'll get a different answer to this about how many victims he had and when they started and all that. But we're just going to concentrate on what they basically agree on as the 5 for sure victims. And really only 4 of them are for sure. But it's very commonly believed that there's at least 5 victims. And those are the ones we're going to focus on tonight.
Okay.
So for our purposes, we're going to start on August 31st of 1888.
Bum, bum, bum. Do you like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was lovely.
Thank
So, it's a dark night
you.
in London town. On the poor side of town, Whitechapel, which, as we said earlier, we've been to. And it's still not a great looking place. It's still kind of a slummy looking place.
No. And even when I lived in England and visited London a few times, like that was never on the list of places to go.
Yeah. They had like a textile market. I think they still have like a textile market.
That market was kind of cool.
Yeah. But that was kind of there back
That's
in the
pretty
day
much it.
too. Yeah. So, so the first victim was Polly Nichols, who was a 45-year-old prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Now, prostitution was very common in London, especially in this area of London, the East End, at this time, because people were out of work, and there's the whole class system in London, and the jobs that were available for single mothers were basically like washerwoman servant kind of work, but there were so many people looking for that kind of work that they weren't high-paying jobs.
Yeah.
It'd be very, very cheaply paid, and a lot of women found it easier to just become prostitutes. And I think the normal rate, I believe that I read, was about 3 pence or a slice of bread,
Yikes.
because that was about the cost of a glass of gin,
Oh.
which is another problem that a lot of these women had.
Gin popped up big time during that time. Yeah. Gin houses.
That's right. So Polly Nichols was a prostitute, and she had been seen by her friend at around 2:30 that morning, and she was staggering drunk. And her friend had a little brief conversation with her, and she had said that Polly told her that she was out trying to raise money to be able to afford a bed for the night at one of the area like hostels.
Yeah.
And she said that she had actually earned the money 3 times that day, but then went and spent it on alcohol instead of going to bed.
Priorities, I suppose.
Right. But she said that she wasn't nervous about it because she still had time. She was going to turn one more trick, and she had just bought a new hat. So she said, my jaunty bonnet will lure him in, and then I'll get my bed for the night. And that's when she left. And she was spotted maybe once or twice after that by other people, but that was really the last conversation that she was reported to have had. She was found just about an hour later with her throat slashed twice and her lower abdomen partially ripped open with a jagged wound, along with other random cuts in the abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
We should warn you right now, folks, by the way. We're going to get not overly graphic, but it's still going to be fairly graphic because, his name was Jack the Ripper. So you can imagine that. Yeah, there was some ripping going on. So there's going to be some talk about it.
But I did like our tour guide, the good one that we had.
Yeah.
When he would make the sound effects.
Yeah.
And instead of explaining what was going on after the second or third time, he would be like, yeah, and then you'd have the
yeah, and then he'd pantomime it.
Yeah.
Like taking out body parts and so yeah. Doesn't work as well on a podcast.
No, can't do that. So maybe I'll just throw in a couple.
But if you ever see Jennie Blades in real life, you can ask her to reenact the crimes of Jack the Ripper for you. She will give a expert rendition. The second victim was 47-year-old Annie Chapman, who was discovered on September 8th, 1888.
Mm-hmm.
Her throat, again, was slashed twice, just like Polly Nichols. And her abdomen was fully slashed open. Polly's was only partially. Annie's was fully slashed open. And her uterus had been removed. Witnesses say that they saw Chapman with a man about a half hour earlier. So just a half hour before she was discovered, she was seen with this man who, most likely then, was her killer. The witness described him as dark-haired and said that he had a shabby genteel appearance.
Nice.
The description she gave basically makes it sound like he was wearing sort of a deer stalker or a flat cap, a cabbie kind of hat,
mm-hmm.
And a pea coat. So I think the view that most people have is kind of like the cloak and the top hat.
Yes.
With white gloves. That is the classic Jack the Ripper.
The fog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he actually probably looked more like a dock worker then. Because if it looked like a fancy gentleman, especially in that part of town, he would have stuck out.
Yeah, suspicions.
And this is clearly somebody that didn't stick out because nobody seems to know. That's the best description they have of him. And that's all they have.
Mm-hmm.
So. And as we can see, the attack is getting more severe.
Yeah.
With the slashed abdomen and the removing of the uterus.
Yuck.
So this is when the police really start to link the crimes together and think maybe that there's one person committing these things. And also this is when the vigilance committees start to form, which were townsfolk who decided to take turns basically patrolling the streets at night looking for anything out of the ordinary. Then I move on to an evening known as the Double Event, which took place on September 30th, 1888.
Mm-hmm.
This is known as the Double Event because Jack the Ripper claimed 2 victims on the same night. The first was Liz Stride, who was known as Long Liz because she was tall. She was a 45-year-old prostitute as well. She was discovered at around 1 a.m. Her throat was cut open, but this time with just one slash to the main artery on the left side of her neck. There was no mutilation of the abdomen. This has caused some people to believe that this is not actually a Ripper victim because it does not bear the trademarks of the Ripper crimes. However, other people believe it is a Ripper crime. He was simply interrupted in the middle.
That's right.
And quickly fled. And then his bloodlust was not satisfied. So he went on to Mitre Square, where he attacked a second victim that night. This is 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes, another prostitute. She was discovered at around 1:45 a.m., so just 45 minutes after the first body was found. The second one was discovered. Her abdomen had been ripped open by long, jagged cuts, and her throat was slashed. Her left kidney had been removed, and so had most of her uterus. Her face was also cut in several places. A bloody piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron was found nearby under some graffiti on a wall that read, "The Jews are not the men who will be blamed for nothing." It's uncertain if the graffiti was left by the killer or not. But either way, the police decided to have it washed away before daybreak, fearing that the words would cause a panic and lead to an anti-Semitic riot.
Was this the one at my favorite location?
Yes, this is Mitre Square.
Sandwich story?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Oh, so this one, when we went on our tour with the guide in London, they brought us into Mitre Square, and I remember the tour guide leaned into the group because there was a gentleman sitting on the park bench across from us, and she kind of whispered to us that her body was found under the park bench where that gentleman was sitting eating a sandwich.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of hilarious.
Yeah, he said, normally I bring everyone over there.
Yeah.
But we don't want to interrupt his lunch.
He's doing his sandwich.
Yeah. So we didn't get to stand right on the spot, but we got to watch a gentleman eat a sandwich on the spot.
Eat a sandwich right over it.
Yeah. Now, this is the time where things really take off. Because this is where the letters start pouring in from the alleged perpetrator. And most of them, they got so many that most of them have to be hoaxes. Unfortunately, we'll never know if any of them probably were real, but there's two that we want to take a special look at. And the first one is what is known as the Dear Boss letter, which was sent on September 27th to the Central News Agency. And Jennie Blades will read you that letter in her best Jack the Ripper voice.
Oh, goodness.
No, just kidding. You don't have to do it. Sorry.
I kept on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me the real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ear off and send it to the police officers, just for jolly, won't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it straight out. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get back to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before. I get all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha.
All right. So that's the letter. Now, that one is actually believed probably to be a hoax. And in fact, there's some people who even think that the news agency sent it to themselves to give a name, because that's the first time the name Jack the Ripper appears in the story. And that obviously has since become the name given to the killer.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not uncommon for newspapers to give unknown murderers names. Happens with every serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, even. But this was the first time that a serial killer was really sensationalized in the papers.
Mm-hmm.
And this letter is taunting. Obviously, he makes comment about the surgical knowledge that the police thought the Ripper might have because he was able to remove the uterus. I'm not a doctor. I have zero medical training. But I bet that if I was to cut somebody open, I would be able to recognize a uterus.
Suppose
and
so.
take it. But also, he took the kidney, too, so maybe he didn't know exactly what he was grabbing.
Yeah, good point.
You know? So, I don't know. I'm not convinced that he had to have any true amount of anatomical knowledge. But again, I didn't see the victims, I wasn't there, and I'm also not a medical doctor.
And I'm also glad that I wasn't there.
Yeah. But, so, I don't, that's one thing that you hear a lot is like, well, he had to have medical knowledge. He had to have medical knowledge. I don't think that's true.
Or he was a butcher. I've heard that
I think
too.
it's possible. Yeah. I think it's possible that those things are true, but I wouldn't discount other people because they don't have those skills.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Putting the blood in the ginger beer bottle. I'm never
Yeah.
drinking ginger beer the same way again right there. That's gross.
All right. And then we get another letter. And this one we're going to mention because of all the letters that did come in, this is the one letter that experts think may possibly have been written by the real Jack the Ripper.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because the letter came with a package.
Ooh, yes.
And it was sent to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Now, the Vigilance Committee was, like I said earlier, basically a vigilante group that was out patrolling the streets looking for suspicious characters. And it was headed by George Lusk. So in the mail, George Lusk got this package with a note attached.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the package was a piece of a kidney.
Ew.
And as we just heard about, Catherine Eddowes' kidney had been removed.
Mm-hmm.
So they did, if I remember correctly, they did some research on the kidney, and it was shown to have the same disease that Catherine Eddowes was known to have.
Ooh, they still had the kidney like today.
I don't know if this was done recently or if it was done back in the day. But it was shown to have the same disease that Catherine Eddowes had. And it was also shown to be the left kidney, which was the kidney that was removed from Catherine Eddowes. However, this disease was very common in those days. So it's possible that it was just a kidney. But
what are the chances?
I don't know.
What
It's
are the
still,
odds?
yeah. It's still the best guess that this was the letter from Jack the Ripper. Now, the last one, another reason why people think the Dear Boss letter was written by someone in the newspaper is that it's very taunting and it's like kind of witty.
Yeah.
It's well written.
It's very well written.
It's like an educated person. This one is a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read it with the spelling.
You're going to do it with the slang? It's
Yeah.
like
I'll do
accent.
it I'll do it in my Cockney that
Luge.
everyone loves so much. Mr. Lusk, sir, I said to you after the kidney I took from one woman preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you will only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk.
That was terrifying.
Now, there's a lot of spelling mistakes. And I decided not to read it exactly as it was written. But most of them are kind of like how you would phonetically say the word.
Mm-hmm.
Like nice is N-I-S-E. He says sore, S-O-R, instead of sir. Yeah, so there's some spelling mistakes. But that, I think, is probably would be more like something that someone who...
Yeah, typical commits
these
doctor
kind of crimes.
kind
It's
of
hard to say because you think about...
medical. Well, you could change your writing.
You could, and you think about like modern serial killers, they actually do tend to be very smart.
This is true.
Not all of them, but a lot of them, like someone like Ted Bundy or something, he was a lawyer, studying to be a lawyer. And he was very like he could have written something more like the first letter.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the temptation is to believe that it would be someone who was a little bit left of center.
Yeah.
And maybe living on the outskirts of society and not as well educated.
Mm-hmm. Maybe he had a little too much gin.
Yeah.
When he sat down to write that.
Yeah. So we'll get into talk about the suspects later, but I think the second letter is more in fitting with the person who would have committed these crimes. And like I said, I'll talk more about that when we get into the suspects later on, but we have one more victim to discuss.
One more victim. The last victim.
Now this one's really unusual because so far they're all prostitutes, and this one's no exception in that way, but they've all been in their 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them were rather plump and kind of matronly looking. Unfortunately, the only picture we have of the next victim, Mary Kelly, is a post-mortem picture.
Yeah.
And it's
not doctored.
Not doctored. I will post it on the website, spookyasshit.com. It is graphic, but it's in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine if it was in color,
that would be
you wouldn't be able to look at it.
Really bad. But
in black and white, you can. I don't think it's as gruesome. But we'll get into it a little bit. But she was only 25 years old, so she was much younger than the other victims. And she was actually, the other victims were all discovered somewhere on the street. Mary Kelly was discovered in her own bed.
Yeah.
In her room.
Yeah.
By her landlord's assistant who had come to collect the rent.
Mm-hmm.
Her throat had been cut down to the bone. Her body was completely disemboweled. And parts of her body were spread all across the room.
Mm-hmm.
Her heart was missing. And her face was basically hacked to pieces. So even when you do look at the picture, you can see that it's a human figure, but you can't see a face.
Yeah, nothing.
You can see the cuts, and you can see how bad the cuts are and everything, but you don't, it's barely recognizable as a human form, basically. So this was sort of his, I hate to use these terms exactly, but his masterpiece. Mm. It's also the last known Ripper victim. But he had much more time.
Yeah, he was
because he wasn't out on the
area.
street. So he really took his time and really mutilated this poor woman.
Yeah.
Like we said, basically beyond recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the crimes. Those are the 5. Like I said, it depends who you ask. They'll tell you there's more or less. And some will say that the crimes went on for years and years. Mm-hmm. But those are the basic crimes that are attributed to Jack the Ripper.
Yep.
And why did he become so famous if he only killed 5 people? We've had serial killers that have killed way more people than that and have gone undiscovered even for a lot longer than that. So why is Jack the Ripper so famous? I think that has a lot to do with the reports at the time, sensationalizing it.
Yeah.
Now, reports still do that, but I think this was kind of the first macabre celebrity that we'd really had along these lines. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's unsolved only adds more to the mystery.
Yeah. And the fact that there's potential copycats that kind of thrown themselves in there to do their dirty work or whatever they needed to do under the guise of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, it's possible. So now we'll talk about some of the suspects that we have. The first suspect that really came into questioning, he was literally brought in for questioning, was Joseph Pizer. Yep. Better known as Leather Apron.
Mm-hmm. And the reason, why was he known as Leather Apron?
Because he wore a leather apron.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for his work. But he was suspicioned because he was known to hate women. He was known to be a violent person. And they had found a leather apron near one of the crime scenes. Mm-hmm. So that's how he fell under suspicion. But he actually had an alibi. And He may have been in prison when one of the other murders took place. I feel like
he
that's
was either
true.
in prison or he was either in a hospital, but it was someplace that it was legitimately documented where he was.
Yeah.
I want to say he was like picked up for something and he was in a holding cell or something.
Okay, so now we're going to go over some of the suspects.
Exciting.
And this is a gigantic list because everybody who's interested in the case, which is many people over all these years, has come up with like their favorite suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have been more or less disproven over the years. Some of them you can't fully disprove. Some of them seem like pretty good suspects until you think, in modern terms. So it's really just a mess. We'd be here forever if we tried to go through every suspect and explain why they were a suspect and what the conspiracy theory is behind everything. So we just handpicked a few folks. So I'll start.
Sure.
And I'm going to start with what they classify as the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the theory that it was these murders were committed by a foreigner, which in these days, in the 1800s, late 1800s in London, meant Jewish immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So the first, the reason why we have these Jewish suspects is because one of the detectives on the case, Anderson, wrote a book called The Lighter Side of My Official Life, in which he was really basically anti-Semitic in general. But he went on to say that I will add that when the individual whom we suspected of being Jack the Ripper was caged in an asylum, the only person who had ever had a good view of the murderer at once identified him. But when he learned that the suspect was a fellow Jew, he declined to swear to it.
Mm-hmm.
So they had someone in custody, and he doesn't mention a name. But researchers have looked into it, of Jewish immigrants who would have been confined to mental institutions during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And a name that they came up with is a man named David Cohen.
Yeah.
And he was known to be especially violent. And the terms of his incarceration fit the crime timelines. And that he was obviously insane. He was sent to an insane asylum.
Mm-hmm.
However, we also have another Jewish suspect who has been on the list for many years. And he almost fits the timeline as neatly as Aaron Cohen does.
Mm-hmm.
And David Cohen. This suspect's name is Aaron Kosminski,
Mm-hmm.
who is a Polish Jewish immigrant. And he lived right in Whitechapel, where the murders took place. And according to a memoranda listing certain suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, it said that he had become insane owing to many years of indulgence in solitary vices. Now, indulgence in
Translation?
solitary vices means masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
So he masturbated and went insane. He had a great hatred of women with strong homicidal tendencies. He was, and I believe still is, detained in a lunatic asylum sometime in March 1889. This man in appearance strongly resembles an individual seen by City PC near Mitre Square. But he's not known to be violent when he's in the insane asylum.
Mm-hmm.
And he also declares that he is guided. He declares that he is guided and that his movements altogether controlled by an instinct that informs his mind. He says that he knows the movements of all of mankind. He refuses food from others because he is told to do so and eats out of the gutter for the same reason.
Gross.
So this guy's really Looney Tunes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for a long time, when I've talked to people about the Jack the Ripper case, I've sort of, based on the suspects that we had available, I've sort of said that Aaron Kosminski or somebody like him would be my prime suspect, but I don't know if that's really true. Like, in the sense that I don't think it was someone who was, like, noticeably this insane.
Yeah, totally wacky.
Yeah. Just based on what we know about serial killers today, they might be awkward. Some of them can be very charming, like we talked about Ted Bundy and even John Wayne Gacy was active in politics and a children's party clown sometimes and that kind of stuff. So sometimes they do fit right into society, but sometimes they're also kind of like the outsider. But it's very rare that you hear about them being like batshit crazy.
Yeah.
Eating out of gutters.
Yeah.
And drooling and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So really, I don't think either of the Jews are great suspects. I still think they're better than some of the other suspects on the list.
Yeah, because there's a lot.
Yeah, but I still think maybe not quite barking up the right tree with those guys. Moving on from them, we also have an American by way of Ireland, but raised in America, Francis Tumblety. He's an American quack doctor, is how they always describe him.
He's got a fancy mustache.
He has a very big, fancy mustache. He also wore a fake military uniform with a bunch of medals pinned to it, and would claim to be friends with General Grant and Abraham Lincoln. He was also accused of being part of the conspiracy to assassinate Lincoln.
Oh, really?
Although, yeah, he was not actually, but he was accused. And he fled to England sometime in 1888. We don't know exactly when he got there. He may have been there in time to commit the murders, but we don't know for sure. Because the first known accounting that we have of him in England is from November 8th, 1888, when he was charged with 8 counts of gross indecency with men, which means homosexual sex.
Yeah.
Now, to me, right there, that disqualifies him as a suspect pretty much. Because from what we know about serial killers, they tend to attack their own race and their own, like, I guess, sexual preference. So it'd be very rare to have a homosexual murderer who murders women. But also, if he was arrested on November 8th, he'd have to be out in just a couple days to be able to commit the Mary Kelly murder.
Right.
And that's possible, but it doesn't seem very likely. But maybe he had money to pay bail or whatever. The tail on his kite is that he fled before his trials, first to France and then back to the United States, where he lived under a different name. But he wasn't known to commit any
those
murders or anything. Although there are theories that he committed the murders under different guise and became the American Ripper. It's a whole long story. Another suspect is George Chapman. And he actually would have been very young to have been the Ripper, because he would have been in his early 20s, which is on the low end of what they think he was more in his mid 20s to mid 30s, based on modern day profiling that has been done of Jack the Ripper. But one of the main reasons he's suspected is because he murdered his wives, but he murdered them by poison. So again, knowing what we know now about serial killers, they don't usually change their modus operandi.
Whoa.
MO. So it's very unlikely that someone would go from, especially in that way, where he was cutting up bodies and removing body parts and spreading them out and kind of organizing them in a certain way, to then just become a poisoner.
Yeah.
Those are two very, very different styles. And the gratificate, like usually the theory is that they're killing to gratify a need. And it doesn't seem likely that those types of murders are satisfying the same need.
Yeah.
So I say
So it wasn't him in Whitechapel with the poison.
not George Chapman. No. Then we have MJ Druitt, Montague John Druitt. And we don't really know how he became a suspect, but he was one of the top suspects at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the only evidence we have for him is that his family thought that he might be the Ripper. And they describe him as sexually insane.
There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, but I don't know what sexually insane in this sense means. I have heard that he was possibly a homosexual as well, but I couldn't find evidence saying that clearly, so I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's what they meant by sexually insane or not. And in the fall of 1888, his father had died. Mm-hmm. That, they think, basically unhinged his mother, who went insane and was taken to an insane asylum. And then he lost his teaching job.
Yeah.
He was fired.
And they don't say why.
No. But after all that, he committed suicide.
Right in the Thames. Splash.
Yeah, that's right. And his body was discovered. And his suicide was right at the time when the murder stopped. Not knowing enough about this guy, I just I don't have a place to rank him because just don't know enough about him.
He takes a nice picture though.
Yeah, he actually has a
gentlemanly.
nice. Yeah, he looks kind of sad in his picture.
Yeah.
And I guess he was because he killed himself.
A lot of stuff that was sad.
Yeah.
Totally off topic. I stayed in the mortuary that they would like pull the bodies out of people who like committed suicide into the Thames.
Yeah, I think you talked
It's
about
down
that.
in Windsor. Let's go.
I think you talked about that on the last episode actually.
Oh, did I?
Because
Oh,
I thought you were saying that you had slept in a working mortuary, but it wasn't. Yeah.
His body didn't go down that far, I don't think.
No. All right, and then the final suspects that we really want to delve into is your favorite theory.
That's my favorite,
your
but
pet
it's
theory.
so totally not legit.
Yeah.
But who doesn't love a good royal scandal, right?
Yeah, I don't know. This one never really interested me. I was always like, I just called bullshit on it right away, but
it's a good story.
All right, go for it.
Well, what was the prince's name?
Albert Victor.
Albert Victor. He was the son of Queen Victoria, and they believe that he had an illegitimate child with, I guess, kind of slumming it, if you will. And they had to hide the child, but there were people there that found out about this illegitimate child and her connection to the royal family, and those people had to be taken care of.
Uh-huh. So it became a big conspiracy where I believe the royal doctor was the one that really did the murders.
Yeah, it was kind of almost like Queen Victoria sent him out to clean up after her son.
And I think that's basically the plot of the movie From Hell. It's been
which
a long
apparently
time
is
since
a book, which I didn't realize was a book.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, the movie.
I haven't seen it since it came out because I saw it in the theaters and I was like pretty
time.
disappointed in it. I think I own it actually, but
oh, I totally own it. I used to watch it all the time.
I think I bought it because it said that they, like in the special features, they take you on a tour of the actual set.
They
the
do.
Sites.
Yeah, that's right. They do.
But they don't really. They take you on the set.
Oh, I don't really remember
and
that.
they just talk about the set. And I was like, oh.
Which is probably better than the current day man eating a sandwich on a bench.
Yeah. I still had fun on the Jack the Ripper tour.
I love the tour.
Yeah. But, yeah, Whitechapel is still kind of a seedy looking place. I remember walking down one street and it was a very narrow like alley. And there were just missing posters and wanted posters, like lining the whole wall.
Was that before we went to the final victim's window? Which
I think so.
Apparently, like, you can rent the apartment. Like, wasn't it like a
No,
home?
the final victim is, I think, is a parking garage now.
Was
like
it?
The actual place, but it might be.
I could have sworn it was still there.
Yeah.
But whatever it was. That might have been on the other tour when we had the poor tour guide.
Yeah.
She wasn't very good.
Yeah, I don't know. But, yeah. And then there's more recent suspects, too, like Patricia Cornwell.
Oh, yeah.
Famous crime writer. Wrote a book. What was the gentleman's name, the artist that she accused? Stickert?
Sickersley?
I think it's Sickert. She accuses him, and there's a whole another conspiracy theory as to why that's true.
And then there's one of why there's not.
Yeah. So basically every suspect you can find, you'll find some people who swear this is it, this is the guy. And then you'll find a bunch of people who will tell you why it's absolutely not that person. And every year or two, there's a new bombshell book.
Yep.
And, there was claims recently of DNA being discovered.
Oh, yeah.
I heard something recently about an Australian suspect. So there's always going to be something. And unfortunately, the truth is we'll probably never know for sure at this point who did it. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean we should stop trying to figure it out, because you never know. There's advances in forensic science, and maybe there'll be some way. Like, they didn't have DNA 100 years ago, and it doesn't hurt to check things now and see if we can find any DNA. It's, pretty late, but maybe we'll find something, and through science, we'll develop more techniques to take harder looks at things and trace bloodlines and DNA lines and whatever else, and maybe we'll come up with somebody.
Yeah.
That would be
Until the
nice.
next person is brought up again.
Yeah.
They'll come up with somebody else.
But in the meantime, it's fun to think about, speculate about, and ripperology is what they call it.
Who do you think did it?
Well, I don't know. Like I said, for years, I think it's someone who probably lived in Whitechapel. So I think it probably was someone of the lower class. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on whether it was a Jewish person or not. As I said before, I don't think it was someone who necessarily had any kind of anatomical knowledge. I don't know what kind of education they had as far as, like, I mean, I'm just thinking like health class, we had posters and stuff of uteruses, so I would recognize the basic shape of a uterus. I assume they didn't have exactly those types of classes back in the day, but still, maybe there were medical textbooks or medical books that people could have looked at, that they would have seen that. Or it's possible they didn't even really know what they were grabbing.
Yeah.
And they just thought, like, oh, this is near the vagina. I'm taking this because...
This is roughly in the vicinity.
Yeah. Like, I guess this is what makes a woman. I don't know. You can't... It's all speculation. That's the problem. So, what about you? Do you have any... I know you want it to be...
I like a good story.
Prince Albert in the can, but...
I don't sit here and say... Oh, well, scientifically and da-da-da-da-da. I just like a
sorry.
good storyline.
Am I ruining things for you?
No, I mean, I don't have a good idea of who I would choose. I don't think any of them really have any sort of great connection. That there's flaws in all of them, but I do like the ones that have a good storyline.
Yeah. What about the Jill the Ripper theories?
Jill the Ripper?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to hear this one.
It was possibly a woman.
I've always thought that.
It's possible.
I know. I've always thought that. I'm telling you.
Well, you just out of the blue pulled out like...
prostitute. Yeah, some other prostitute wanted to get rid of the competition. She needed to make a couple extra bucks.
Could be.
Needed a couple extra shots of gin.
Could be.
Or other people, just every other person in Whitechapel in 1888 jumped on the bandwagon and just started going nuts.
Yeah.
Used it as an alibi.
Well, like we said, this is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. One of these days we'll talk about stuff on the American side, like maybe Black Dahlia or Zodiac Killer.
Ooh.
That kind of stuff.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's some real spooky shit. Jack the Ripper is far enough away, and he only attacked prostitutes, so like you feel pretty safe.
Yeah. Still
but,
kind of gross and.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. It's terrible still, but you don't feel like you're in danger.
Right in your backyard, yeah.
Yeah. Or anything, but Zodiac Killer could still be out there.
Ah.
So, never know. All right. Anyway, we'll talk about all that some other time.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks for coming back.
Cool.
I hope you come back again.
Cool.
In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit the website, spookyasshit.com, for fun pictures. And if you have any questions or comments or show ideas, feel free to shoot those to me at spookyasshit@gmail.com. And you can also find us on Instagram and Twitter, both at spookyasshit. And until next time, don't be afraid.